Center of Excellence in Safety and Analytics, IIT Kharagpur welcomes all the participants to this 8th weekend talk on safety engineering management and analytics. Sanjana, you can change the screen. So we start with this beautiful shloka, Sanskrit shloka, Asatoma Satgamaya, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, Vityarma Amritam Gamaya. It prays to Almighty that lead us from ignorance to truth, from darkness to light, and from death to immortality. So with this good spirit, we initiate our 8th weekend talk, and we are blessed with a very, very expert speaker today with us. There's an announcement from Center of Excellence, IIT Kharagpur. The COE-SEA is jointly organizing an international conference on maintenance and intelligent asset management with 3 verticals: asset management and systems, reliability, availability, and maintainability, maintenance management. Invite Professor J. Maiti, our chairman, COE-SEA, Professor Obi Krishna, the convener of the weekend series, and Professor Jenseric Renius, our expert speaker, to the virtual dais. So Professor Jenseric Renius, he's a Master of Science in Chemical Engineering, a full professor at the Safety and Security Science Group at the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands, where he teaches courses related to risk analysis and risk management. He's also a professor in the part-time capacity in the Kulben and at the University of Antwerp, both in Belgium. His main research interests concern the collaboration surrounding safety and security topics and socio-economic optimization within the chemical industry. Amongst many other academic achievements and output, he has published 250 plus scientific papers in the high-quality academic journals and has co-authored and co-edited some 40 books. He serves as an editor of the Journal of Loss Prevention in the Process Industries and as an associate editor of the journal Safety Science. So we are very, very blessed to have such an expert speaker from the land of tulips, from the land of cheesemakers. So I request Professor J. Maiti, sir, to please formally welcome our expert speaker.
Thank you, ma'am. Professor Jenseric Renius, we are really privileged and we are extremely thankful to you for your kind acceptance of giving the expert talk on a very emerging topic, that operational safety economics. And we all are basically struggling for this because we don't know that much about that, how the safety related decisions can be made, keeping in the budget, the organizational budget into the consideration. And that sense, I am sure that today our participants will be extremely benefited from this very timely and I can say noble talk. So we are really thankful to you, Professor Jenseric. And COE in Safety Engineering and Analytics, and from IIT Kharagpur, I welcome you to this inaugural to this weekend talk. And I will not tell much about your that credential. It is very much well known to everybody. Mom has said a few of them. But if you Google Professor Jenseric, you will understand that the academic level, what he has achieved, it is enormous. We cannot, personally, I cannot match up it. So we will learn from you today, and the participants also will be benefited. Now it is more than 120 participants, and I think within another few minutes, it will be more than 150. With these few words, I request and I welcome Professor Jenseric to give your talk. Thank you, Professor Jenseric.
Thank you very much, Professor Maiti, for these very kind and very nice words. I really thank you also for asking me to give this presentation. I think it's indeed a timely topic, which is very important, so I'm going to do my best to explain. But I think you're too modest, by the way, Professor Maiti. I think you are really a very well respected and well-known professor as well. Yeah? So if you allow me, I will now try to share my
yes, sir. Now everybody very well.
Okay, thank you very much again for your nice introduction, for all the nice words. So now I'm going to tell you something that is the basics, what I consider the basics, because we can go much deeper into the different topics that I'm going to touch of operational safety economics. Well, you've heard about me already, so I don't have to say any words about this. This is indeed a number of books I've written together with other people. A number of books. You see here the diversity of books. I think safety is a very diverse field. You should look upon it from different disciplines, from different angles. Myself, I'm a chemical engineer, but with a PhD in economics. So this talk is really going to be about this book, that I've co-authored together with another author. But you see that there's much more to talk about, okay? But this talk is about operational safety economics, and how to see what is operational safety economics is, of course, the first question, and then we will touch upon it by introducing several concepts. So what do we talk about when we talk about operational safety economics? We are talking about the decision-making regarding, well, safety investments, that's prevention, protection, mitigation, strategic measures, all kinds of safety measures, proactive, reactive, and timely, to avoid or mitigate possible future losses, possible future consequences, losses, because if you talk about safety, you talk about losses or avoiding losses, the same with security, but safety is unintentional, due to unwanted events related with company operations and activities, and thereby, in this decision-making process, taking microeconomic parameters into the decision-making process. So the microeconomic parameters can be diverse, can be of different kind. We will discuss some basic parameters in a minute. Okay, but that's what we're talking about. We talk about trying to feed decision-making about safety investments with economics on top of course, all the more rational and technological information that you have. So this is the presentation overview. We talk very briefly about risk and safety, then some notions that are really the basic notions of microeconomics, so economics on the level of a company, of an organization. Then some concepts for taking decisions, the overlap of safety and economics. One slide with a number of categories of safety costs. Then one slide with a number of categories of safety benefits. You can find the calculations, the formulas to calculate all the costs and the benefits in the book. I'm merely going to categorize them to tell you what is out there and what should be involved in the determining of the costs and the benefits. And then some examples. I hope we can get to the examples, because the examples, I think, are very enlightening in principle. And then the recommendations. I'll try to do that. First, something about the safety and risk. If you think about economics, you think about, okay, I want to make an as good as budget allocation as possible with respect to safety. All kinds of prevention, protective measures. Ideal is that you have a diversification of measures in your company and that you decide on this as good as possible, and that as many benefits, as many hypothetical benefits are gained as possible. So as many accident losses as possible are achieved, okay? So in that regard, you should see safety is a kind of state. Can be a feeling, can be a mind, can be a real state of something. And you cannot actually quantify safety unless you use the concept of risk. That's why we use risk. We want to quantify the state at a certain time. So at this moment, all kinds of things can happen to each one of us. Many scenarios are possible. And therefore, we try to use the concept of risk, and risk in terms mostly of likelihood and consequences, but you can think about other things that can be involved as well. We will see in a later slide here. But in any case, you have many scenarios, and each scenario represents a risk, okay? And therefore, if we talk about economics, we talk about the summation of the possible risks at a certain moment in time. And risk has two sides, but we are talking about the negative side, the safety. So the risk sandglass is just saying it's not important that that risk has two sides, and that if you expose to certain uncertainties, risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives, according to ISO 31000, to risk management guideline. If you're exposed to uncertainties for making money, for getting benefits, for gains, yeah, you have to know that you can also lose money. Yeah, there are two types of risk, and one type is the occupational risk. So but you gain not that much, and you can lose not that much. The other type is really the disaster risk, or the big gains. If you expose yourself to big gains, to big money, you can also expect to lose big money sometimes. You have to realize that there are risks involved. Okay. Now, a risk is usually quantified, as we all know, probably by likelihood times consequences. That is what this slide says. But you have an infinite number of scenarios, and then you can calculate the expected value of the scenarios. We will do that the next slide. Sometimes you can also involve the attitude of the decision maker, of the person making the decision about the safety investments. And that's done by using what is called an aversion factor, the A that you see here. If A is 1, you have a risk-neutral attitude or a consequence-neutral attitude. The people are indifferent with respect to likelihood or consequences. If you have A bigger than 1, you have a risk-averse attitude, meaning that people are averse towards accident scenarios with large consequences. People hate accidents where, for example, 30 people at the same time die. And then you have, for example, if you are risk averse, you put it higher on your risk prioritization level, and therefore you use an aversion factor of 1.2, 1.3 for cost benefits analysis, or for societal cost benefits analysis, or for company cost benefits analysis. That's, well, one thing that you have to know about the quantification of risk. Now, the expected value, for example, we can simplify the real world, with 3 scenarios. Say that there's only 3 scenarios possible. Scenario 1, nothing happens. That's the biggest probability, 90%, with a consequence of 0. We talk only about safety, so the negative part of risk. We don't talk about the positive part. Scenario 2 is a small accident with a probability of 9.9%, with a consequence of €1,000 of costs. And scenario 3 is a very small probability of 0.1%, and that's a major accident that costs you €900,000. So then, in this simplified case of reality, in reality, as I said, there are an infinite numbers of scenarios. So in theory, if you could actually get to know all the possible scenarios with all the possible probabilities and all the possible consequences, you could really, of course, do a very accurate job. In reality, this is not possible, but we do it the best way we can, and that's by assumptions and by proxies. So you calculate the expected value, and that's just by multiplying the probability with the consequence per scenario and then adding it up. As you see here, 990, it should be 999 if you calculate it. So it's a little mistake on the slide. But anyway, this is how you calculate expected values. You all know probably, but remember it because we're going to use it in a later stage. I'm trying to go to the next slide. Let me see. Okay. So then, as I said, we have three types of risks. Well, actually 2 types of risks, with the third type being an extremum of the second type. So we have the small risks, or the occupational risks. By the way, they are the same in all industrial sectors. When you go, whether you go to the construction, to chemical industry, to nuclear industry, to transportation, whatever, they are the same. And there are specific risk assessment methods to deal with these kind of risks, type 1, and there are specific economic approaches to deal with type 1 risks. Okay, you can use much easier, for example, statistical methods, statistics, because there's much more information available. They happen much more, and there's more information. In the case of type 2 risks, we talk about disaster-related risks, major risks. They happen much less information is available, and you need other kinds of risk assessment methods and also other kinds of economic approaches to deal with this kind of risks. So remember this, because this also will come back when you talk about the concept of risk. And economics. And then you have the type 3, which are the black swan risks, and they can be considered as an extremum of the type 2 risks in the sense that they never happened. Okay, they never happened. Once they happen, they become a type 2 risk. But in a sense, you have two risks, type 1 and type 2, and they should be treated in two different departments with two different budgets. And you want to optimize your safety investments for the type 1 risks as well as for the type 2 risks. Remember the BP Texas City accident in 2005? There it became very, very clear that you should not use the same budget for the two types of risks. You need budgets for two types, and then you need to optimize for type 1 and optimize for type 2. Otherwise, the risk exists that you put too much of the budget in one type of risk and you disregard the other type of risk. Okay, having said that, let me see, because again, I'm trying to go to the next slide. Yes. Having said that, of course, economics is only one part of risk management. Risk management is much, much more, of course. You see, in this case, economic issues is only one part, and for the rest, you have the risk assessment that has to be done in a well way, business continuity management, learning from accidents, reliability engineering, risk climate, risk culture, so the HOFs, human and organizational factors of risk, legislation, all kinds of things. So it's only one part. But the part that is really underused these days, because people mainly make decisions based on risk matrices, the risk matrix, and they try to rank risks in the risk matrix without any economic information. Then they have a number of risks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 until 30, for example, and then they try to implement safety measures for decreasing, for dealing with the first 5 risks. Although it could be, for example, economically more interesting, or also from a safety viewpoint more interesting to, for example, deal with risks number 1, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, because it delivers you more hypothetical benefits. It delivers you more scenarios that have been avoided and losses that have been avoided. Okay. So let's go to the microeconomics, the notions. Well, this is just again explaining the expected value, so we can skip this. You can calculate an expected value also, for example, using the aversion factor, that's what this says, or for example also using the positive outcome of possible scenarios. So you can have the possible and the negative outcome of scenarios into one expected value of a safety investment, for example. Yeah? If you look at this decision tree, it's a bad decision tree, but it's just to make a point. You can also calculate the expected values for every point in the tree. Yeah. So, for example, the 100 euro on the right-hand side that you see there, it's just the expected value of the two outcomes that are possible. 0.9 is a probability times 0 euro plus 0.1. Times 1,000 euro gives you 100 euro, and that's the expected value in that point. And then you can calculate it back. We will use that later on, but remember it. So you can easily calculate an expected value of a bundle of safety barriers, safety functions, safety measures that are there if you have an event tree. But an event tree is something that is well understood throughout industry, I think. If you use microeconomics, you also have to have what is called rationality, rational decision makers. We know that not all the time this is the case. It's not always the case, rational decision makers, but for using the models, using the mathematics that we want, we assume this. So this is a mistake in the assumption. It can be a mistake in the assumption in the end. So of course there are lots of uncertainties involved in doing operational safety economics, in trying to grasp the economic problems and the economic value, etc. So this is one of them. But in principle, we assume that preferences are complete. So the safety managers are capable to rank all the safety measures according to their preferences. Sometimes it's not possible, always very difficult. The preferences are transitive, meaning that if a safety manager prefers a safety measure X over safety measure Y and Y over Z, then automatically he prefers X over Z. Not always the case in principle. Then every safety measure is desirable. So the more you have of a safety measure, the better. And last but not least, the economic rule of diminishing marginal rate of return on investment, it holds. So the more you have of one type of safety measure, the less gain it brings. And that's actually saying that you need to diversify your safety measures in your decision-making process, in the decision-making. Now, the discount factor is another microeconomic parameter that's important. That's just saying that future money is less worth than current money. And the higher the discount factor, the lower the present value of future cash flows. Okay? The net present value is nothing but the present value taking into account the discount factor of the benefits minus the present value of the costs. So if you have a net present value greater than 0, then it means that the benefits are bigger than the costs or greater than the costs. So it's good. So an investment in that kind of safety is recommended. To calculate the net present value, you see the formula on the bottom of this page. Net present value is the summation over a time horizon. For example, the safety barrier works for 10 years or for 20 years or for 5 years, then the time horizon is 5 or 10 or 20 years. And then you have the cash flows, XT, divided by 1 plus the discount factor to the T, and T is then, of course, the years added up, because every year there has to be a discount of the cash flows, of course. That's why this formula is like this. Then the time horizon, already mentioned, is actually important because it will sometimes make an investment worthwhile or not. It can be a very big difference if you look at an investment, a safety measure that is to be used for 5 years or for 15 years. Okay, for 5 years, then you only have the costs for 5 years, but also only have the benefits for 5 years. Okay, if you have it for 15 years, that's a whole new story. It can be that the safety investment can be very profitable in 15 years, but not profitable in 5 years. So the time horizon and the choice of the time horizon with background information is very important in the economic analysis that you are doing, in the economic approach that you use. Sometimes it's easy to use the same amount of money over the years, and that's what we call annuity. So if you want to make yourself to make it easy for yourself, you use annuity. So the costs and the benefits stay the same over the 5, the 10, the 15 years. So you don't have to calculate the costs every year in the future, etc. So that's to make calculations easier. In reality, of course, this will be an approximation. It's not completely correct. Another term that we can mention is the variability. And variability is the maximal cost of a safety investment option minus the minimal cost of a safety investment option. And then you also can use the normalized variability, which is the variability divided by the maximum cost, as some kind of measure for uncertainty of a safety option. And then you have, of course, different kinds of cost-benefit ratios. That's if you use cost-benefits. Cost-benefits is just calculating the costs, eventually the present value of the costs, calculating the benefits or the present value of the benefits, and dividing them and see what is the ratio. Okay, and then see whether the costs are bigger than the benefits or the costs are smaller than the benefits. This can be mainly done in case of type 1 risks, not type 2 risks. Type 2 risks are the disaster risks, and there you need to use a disproportion factor, usually. So disproportion factor that prefers or focuses on safety over unsafety. We'll talk about that in a minute. So there are different kinds of cost-benefit ratios. I will not read them. You can look at them. I guess that the PowerPoint presentation is available to all speakers. So this is just a concrete example of a calculation of a cost-benefit ratio. It's not that exciting. A cost-effectiveness analysis is something else. Cost-effectiveness is really optimization of the budget. If you have a certain budget, then you try to optimize within the budget the allocation of safety barriers. of safety measures. And you do that by using operations research techniques, okay? So it's a linear programming problems that you have here. You have a certain budget, you have a certain amount of possible options of safety investments by different kind of safety measures, and you try to identify the bundle, the combination of safety measures that delivers you the highest hypothetical benefits, the highest avoided losses within the budget. That's an operations research problem, okay? Another advantage, you can do that in monetary terms. You can also, another benefit of cost effectiveness analysis, but then it's not possible to do it in monetary terms with operations research, but you can also understand that cost effectiveness, it's not necessary to always express everything in money. You can also use utilities, yeah, the happiness that you get by implementing a certain measure, for example. Or, for example, the numbers of lives saved. And you don't have to express the a human life, into a monetary value then, okay, for avoiding ethical issues, etc. So actually, this is also possible, and then you also have some kind of a ratio, the cost effectiveness ratio that you see on the bottom of this page. The costs of option I minus the cost of option J divided by the effectivity, for example, expressed in the improvement of quality of life of option I minus the effectivity, for example, the improvement of quality of life of option J. An opportunity cost is another important microeconomic parameter that should be taken into consideration, or at least in the mind of the decision maker, in the sense that it's the amount that one loses by not employing the means at their best potential use. So in reality, of course, these opportunity costs are very, very difficult to calculate and to determine, because it's based on what could have been realized if you didn't do that, but it's something else. What would it have delivered, and what's the difference what it delivers now? As you can see now in the COVID period, in the COVID pandemic, this is very, very difficult. What would have been if we would have taken different measures? Very difficult. Nonetheless, in a company setting, in an organizational setting where you want to make the best decisions possible, it's quite important, this concept, because it urges to think, to think the decision maker to think as thoroughly as possible in terms of alternative investments and what it comes out beforehand, before making the decision, okay? And the trade-offs and the criteria that need to be used and considered in the allocation of budgets. So a concrete example of an opportunity cost is this one. Say you have a safety investment of 100,000 euro, and you avoid the losses of 120,000 based on, for example, a number of scenarios that are avoided with probabilities and consequences, and you have a profit then of 20,000 euro. In the other case, another safety investment option would be the investment of 75,000 euro with an avoided accident cost of 94,000 euro. So then you have a profit of investment of 19,000, which is less than the 20,000. But if you would then use the 25,000 that you have of your budget that you have left, that's still available, and you put it on the bank and you have an interest rate of 5%, then you have an extra revenue of 1,250. So actually you have a total profit of investment of 20,250. So the opportunity cost in this case would be 250 euros. So as you can see, this is very, very difficult if you put it in reality, but nevertheless, if you do the exercise, you know more than if you don't do the exercise. It's always the same. In risk assessment, it's always, you can have many problems with it and many arguments against it. But if you don't do any risk assessment, you're blind. You take measures blind. It's the same with economic assessments and economic analysis. If you use the economic approach, if you do the calculations and you make all the assumptions, etc., you can have many problems with it and many arguments against it. But if you don't do it, you're blind. You're economically blind. You just take measures with your belly feeling. It's always better to have data, information, and to use, especially in these circumstances where lots and lots is possible with computer calculation power and etc. So it's better to really try to start doing the economic analysis and be not as blind as before. Okay, another parameter that is important to mention is hypothetical benefits. So hypothetical benefits are actually all the avoided losses. So you have many accidents that can happen, and you try to, accident scenarios that can happen, and you try to avoid them with the safety investment that you do. So due to the fact that we do safety investments, you have dynamic non-events, things that don't happen, non-taking place incidents. So due to the fact that we have these non-events, we have a lot of losses, non-losses, losses that are avoided. So that's important, okay? Definitions for the hypothetical benefits can be, for example, you look at the worst case scenario. So you calculate the maximum possible accident cost without the investment, and you subtract the maximum possible accident cost with safety investment. And you can also calculate, for example, expected hypothetical benefits, and then you calculate the expected accident cost without safety investment, and you subtract the expected accident cost with the safety investment. These are, for example, hypothetical benefits definitions, but you can maybe find your own or a better one, or a more fine-tuned one for your own organization or company. Something that I already mentioned is the disproportion factor. So the disproportion factor is actually used to verify whether a safety investment is disproportional or not disproportional. And that can be used for type 2 risks, for disaster risks, okay? So you multiply the benefits of a safety investment with the disproportion factor, and you evaluate it with respect to the costs of the safety investment, right? So then you emphasize, you focus on the benefits, on the safety, instead of the unsafety. Because say that for a disaster risk, and the disasters are always more costly than you can calculate, say for a disaster, and also it's very difficult to understand how risk-averse societies and the government is, etc. So suppose that for a disaster risk, you have benefits of, you have costs for the safety investments of 100,000 euro. Okay, you have 100,000 euro of costs, and the benefits, if you calculate it, all the calculations, you have 75,000 euro. Of course, if you don't use a disproportion factor, the costs would be higher than the benefits. 100,000 euro is higher than 75,000 euro. But then, if you use a disproportion factor, for example, of 3, just saying 3 is the minimum number, by the way, then you multiply the 3 by the 75,000 euro, it's 225,000, is higher than the costs. And the disproportion factor, by the way, is calculated or can be calculated by using the group risk curve, the societal risk curve. It's 3 factors that are taken out of the societal risk curve, and using these 3 factors, it's very mathematical, you can calculate the disproportion factor. But maybe you can find another way to calculate the disproportion factor in your organization. But anyway, the idea, the concept behind it is that you multiply the benefits of a safety investment with a certain disproportion factor based on something. Usually it's using the group risk curve, and then balancing it or evaluating it against the costs of this investment. And then this way it is verified whether the investment is disproportional or not, whether the costs are much too high with respect to the benefits or vice versa, or not, okay? So let's now talk about some concepts for taking decisions. Well, first of all, it should be mentioned that there are many important remarks and concepts with respect to making decisions. There are some psychological effects and biases. For example, the loss aversion bias, or a psychological principle. The loss aversion means that people hate to lose, and that I put more emphasis on losses than on benefits. So for example, if you think about it, if I would ask you to make a choice between 2 options, option A and option B, option A, I throw a dice, a coin. I throw a coin, sorry, and you have two sides on the coin. And if it's one side, you have to. I give you I give you 5,000 euro, and if it's the other side, I give you 10,000 euro, for example. Yeah, most of the people will choose the 10,000 euro, so the gamble, because we'll choose the 5,000 euro, not the gamble, because we're talking about the positive side. So I give you 5,000 euro with certainty, or I throw the coin, and if it's heads, I give you 10,000 euro, and if it's tails, I give you nothing. So most people will choose the 5,000 euro for certain. On the other hand, I do another experiment, and we say that you have to give me for certain 5,000 euro, or I throw the coin up again, and if it's heads, you give me 10,000 euro, and if it's tails, you give me nothing. It's okay. So then most people will go for the gamble. That's loss aversion. And this psychological effect there's been many experiments all over the world, and two people won the Nobel Prize for this effect, actually, two psychologists. This can be readily translated to safety in terms that people gamble with type 2 risks, with large accidents, because they see investments in large-scale prevention as some kind of certain loss. And gambling with the major accident scenario, which can take place or cannot take place, but the probability is very low, is preferred over the certain loss. And on the other side, if you look about production, people prefer, of course, increasing the production. So it's a certain gain instead of the uncertain gain. Now, uncertain gain being then more investment in safety. Reality is also the endowment effect, and there are other psychological effects that are at place here for decision makers. So decision makers have to take this into their mind that they are subject to psychological biases. That's one thing. Second, reality is always much more complex than theory. You should realize that. Models are only models for everything, also for risk assessment techniques and also for economic approaches, so be aware. 3, there are different types of risks, type 1 and type 2, and you should treat them differently. Treat them with different risk assessment methods, treat them with different economic approaches, with also disproportion factor or not. So you treat them differently. 4th, it's important to realize that all the risks are relative to each other. It's not that we have absolute figures in principle. So it's okay to have some kind of uncertainty over the results of the risk calculations, because the risks are relative anyway. They should be regarded as relative to each other within the type, to be clear. Anyway, okay. And then last but not least, of course, there are ethical aspects. For example, the value of human life. It has been investigated a lot, the value of human life. And the value varies greatly with a factor 500 from 50,000 to 25 million per human life if you make decisions. But this it's not in principle a problem, because the risks are relative and you search for the most optimal bundle of safety measures within the region that you are using, for example, the value of human life and also all the values of all the other safety measures and the materials, etc., etc. So everything is relative within the region that you use the amount, the value. So in that regard, it's possible to use this value, okay? Moreover, it's rationally possible and justifiable to assume that people are prepared to pay more to reduce the higher likelihood type 2 risks than to reduce the lower likelihood type 2 risks. So even that something to refine your economic approach. And then you have something like this. If it is the probability is 1 in a million, the value is 4 million. If the probability is 1 in 10,000, the value is 8 million. Because of the probability is much higher, and therefore people are prepared to pay more for the prevention of this kind of risk than in the case of 1 in a million. But that's future research, current and future research. This is another thing, the ethical aspects of safety. You know that now risk is calculated, as I said in the beginning, mainly by likelihood and consequences with scenarios. Yeah? In principle, of course, people perceive risk in a different way. Yeah? And this perception is really important. And therefore, the risk is not the same for everybody. That's clear. Because, for example, if you have a person that only has 5,000 euro and he puts 1,000 euro in the lottery to win something, yeah, then of course he puts almost all his money in the lottery. If you have a millionaire, yeah, that puts 1,000 euro in the lottery to win something, it's a completely different risk perception. So the risk perception is completely different between people. And this can be also translated in the future, I think, in the way that risks are calculated. For example, you have the rational part of risk with the likelihood and the consequence, but perhaps also in the future, the more emotional part of risk, or the perceptual part of risk, if you want, with, for example, the voluntariness with which the risk is taken, the equity principle, who bears the risk has to pay for it, etc., liability, the fairness principle, the recklessness, etc. This slide is just merely to say, in the future, possibly, we not only calculate risks by using the rational factors, by using the consequences, the likelihoods of the scenarios, but perhaps also using more emotional factors like fairness, equity, recklessness by management, etc. And then we can have a better understanding of the prioritization of risks, not only with the very rational prioritization, but also the prioritization where feelings and emotions and perceptions are taken into consideration in some way. Okay, then we have the decision-making process. Well, decision-making is in principle dependent on several well, it's just a suggestion, several graphs, like the information availability and variability graph. Then you go to some kind of economic approach model that you can use. You choose one based on all kinds of criteria. And then, of course, you carry it out and you come to a decision. And of course, the criteria, so the stakeholder values and the perception of reality, they will influence everything. That's clear. It's not possible to make it completely objective. It's always some part of subjectivity involved. So this is the figure of information availability, variability. Always you have some kind of information available about the risk. So from very limited, for example, to very extensive. And always you have a certain variability. So the difference between max and min. And that's from very low to very high. And then you can divide, every company can do it for himself based on the situational circumstances, on the specific circumstances of that company. And you have several areas, A, B, C, D. That's one thing. The second thing is that you can have a region division. So you have in principle 4 regions, the negligible region, the acceptable region, the tolerable region, and the intolerable region. The two extremes, so the intolerable region and the negligible region, they are simple. They don't require economics. Because if it's unacceptable, you just stop it, or you just have to make a safety investment anyway because it's not allowed or it's not acceptable. In case of the negligible one, you don't have to do anything but monitor whether the risk doesn't get into one of the other regions. Okay, but it's in the ALARP region, the middle region, that it's important to do the economic approaches in the tolerable and acceptable region. So, and you see there until the dotted line, you have the type 1 risks, and then from the dotted line on upwards, you have the type 2 risks. So from the dotted line upwards, you can use the disproportion factor, and below you use the regular factor. You can translate this figure into the risk matrix, and then you get something like this. And you see that in principle, the risk matrix also always has 4 regions, yeah, from unacceptable to negligible. And the region where you really have to make the decisions about economics or economic decisions, what kind of safety bundles, safety combinations, safety barrier combinations do I have to use, is 2 and 3. It's acceptable and tolerable risk region. And then you can use these different figures to determine what kind of economic approach you can use. Okay, so where do you get some, maybe you talk about the type 2 risks in a B area and then in the tolerable region, and then you see that you, for example, can use a cost-benefit analysis for type 2 or a cost-effectiveness analysis for type 2, taking into account operations research, the Bayesian network approach, the border algorithm approach, the safety value function approach, etc. You can find all these approaches actually in the book that I mentioned. Okay. Then some overview of possible safety costs. So the costs of safety investments, the costs of safety measures. This is a categorization. You have, you see, you have perhaps more categories than you would think about in first instance. But for a safety measure, you need, for example, an initiation, installation, operation, maintenance, inspection, logistics, contractor safety, other safety costs. Some of them may be omitted, may not be applicable, but others may. And for these different types of safety costs, you have a number of subcategories of safety costs. You see, from investigation costs to production losses, to inspection team costs, to training costs, etc. All these are costs if you want to implement safety barriers. Okay? And the formulas, the calculation formulas, can be found in the book, Operational Safety Economics. The same holds true for safety benefits. These are all actually costs for accidents. So all can be seen as avoided costs, avoided losses, things that you avoid, costs that you avoid if you implement certain safety barriers. Okay, so these avoided supply chain cost, and avoided damage cost, avoided legal costs, avoided insurance costs, if you don't have these accident scenarios. And then you can fine tune into the different subcategories of the avoided accident cost, and all the formulas to calculate, to do the calculations of these subcategories can again be found in that book. So let's now discuss some examples of economic approaches, because we are approaching the end of this talk. So you can do an investment analysis, for example. The investment analysis can be calculating the internal rate of return. Some companies want for every investment a certain internal rate of return. Well, this can be done for safety as well, for a safety investment option. Then you just have to you use the net present value equally to 0, and then you can get out of this formula, solving this equation, you get the internal rate of return, which is the discount factor if the net present value is 0. Okay. You also have the payback period that you can easily calculate. And that's this way. So you can calculate in an investment analysis how soon you get your money back. This is an example of an investment analysis. So you suppose you did your homework and you calculated all the costs of your safety investments. You find it in the table on the left-hand side. And you calculate also all the benefits. You can see here that some costs are not recurring, and some costs are recurring yearly. Okay? In case of the benefits, all the benefits are recurring yearly. So it is quite important in this case, for example, that you have a higher time horizon if possible. We assume for this illustrative example that the safety budget is €500,000 and that the time horizon for the safety barrier to work is 10 years. And then if you have all this data with a discount factor of 3%, you can do all the calculations, and then you find that the net present value of this safety investment using the formula, for example, is only type 1, only type 1 risks, is 659,850. And the payback period is 3.84 years, and the internal rate of return would be almost 25%. For risk treatment is choosing about different kinds of options. For example, you can choose to do nothing. That's the retention option. You can choose to do an investment in prevention and protection, for example. You can choose to insure yourself. That's also possible, risk transfer, insuring yourself against scenarios. Or you can make some kind of combination of options. You invest in prevention and protection, but less than you would invest if you would deal with the entire number of scenarios. And you you insure yourself also against the rest of the the rest risks. The risks are still there. Well, then you can do all the calculations. For example, you can calculate the total expected accident cost, of variability, the normalized variability, the hypothetical benefits, for example, the max benefits and the expected benefits. And then if you do that for all the different options available, you can have an idea of, within a certain uncertainty of the decision that you are looking at, you can make a decision. Well, risk treatment 1, 2, 3, or 4 is the best one. Okay. Then the Borda algorithm. That's also something I want to say because it's very simple. And the Borda, it's using a Borda rule, which is used in election sciences. So to put it very simply, this is for obtaining an ordinal ranking of alternatives. You have, for example, several safety investment options, and you want to know which safety investment option is the best one based on certain criteria. Yeah. So, for example, if you have 4 safety investment options and you have 5 criteria, you determine it yourself as a company. Yeah? You have the absolute cost of safety that you find important, the expected hypothetical benefits of the safety investment, the cumulative probability of accident scenarios avoided, the payback period, and the internal rate of return. Say that these are the 5 criteria that we find important to decide whether a safety investment option is important or not. Then you have to evaluate every safety investment option for every criterion. For example, safety investment option 3 is better than 2 and 1 in the first case for the absolute cost of safety, and that's better than 4. Okay, for every investment option you have this exercise that you have to do, and then based on the Borda algorithm, which is assigning points to the different options, you get this table and you can verify what is the best option. In this case, option number 1 has the most points, so is the best one, although it's the most costly one, as you saw in this picture. Option 3 is the most costly, so option 1 is not the most costly, but it's more costly than option 3, for example. But it's not necessarily the best one. Another thing I want to say is the decision tree that we discussed also in the beginning. I'm going to show the picture. It's better than all the words. So you have all kinds of information. You have information about the safety barriers that you want to implement. You want to verify whether a certain bundle, a certain combination of safety barriers is profitable or not. Then you have the amount of money that costs you the safety barriers. So 2,500 euro plus 500 plus 1,500 plus 5,000. That's the total cost of the combination of safety measures. And then you also have information about the effectiveness of these safety barriers. For example, the first safety barrier works in 60% of the cases, and in 40% of the cases doesn't work. The second safety barrier works in 70% of the cases, and in 30% of the cases it doesn't work, etc., etc. And then you get to the consequence in the end of the end scenario. So you go from €0 to 1 million euro. And in this case, then you can calculate back from the end, from the costs of the scenario, taking into account also the probability of the safety barriers that work or not work, and you can calculate the expected value towards the first point in the tree. So where you have the first branches, and in this case, the expected value is 2,398 euro. If you then multiply this amount by 0.1, which is the probability of the initiating event, of course, you have only 239 euro. It's much, much lower than the summation of the costs of the safety barriers. So you should not invest in this very illustrative case. Okay? Even if you would consider it a type 2 event, you should not invest because the disproportion factor would be higher than 30, which is not allowed. I mean, you never have a disproportion factor higher than 30. In this case, it would be 39. That's much too high. Okay. Okay, last, I'm relatively concluding. You can also try to develop a decision tree based on the variable cost. This is just the cost that varies in the decision tree. It's mostly used in health economics. In this case, for example, you have in the beginning a decision whether to cooperate with respect to domino effects or not, some kind of accidents that can happen in the chemical industry. So if you cooperate, it would cost you 10,000 euro, but then you go further down the decision tree with different branches based on, and then you have several probabilities. Nothing happens or a large-scale fire happens, several probabilities, and based on the fact that you collaborate or not, of course, the probabilities will be different. And if you then calculate everything back, you see that the expected value in the case of collaboration is 10,705 euro, but the expected value in case of no collaboration, where you don't have to give an initial amount of money for collaboration, it's 13,000 euros. So it's higher than the other one. So although you now do a good case by not collaborating, by not investing the 10,000 euro, in principle, it says that the expected value is higher. Yeah, it will cost you more in the long term because of possible accidents that can happen down the road because of not collaboration. So these were some very simple techniques. You can have more techniques to use. The cost effectiveness with the operations research, of course. Cost benefit analysis, of course, in a more profound way. Multi-criteria analysis, multi-attribute theory, safety value functions, Bayes and network theory, limited influence diagrams. You can use all these different things for doing economic analysis. To conclude, I want to give the message that I think that the combination of microeconomic aspects with budgets, costs, etc., and safety aspects is currently too little used and discussed in academia as well as in industry. To have a profound understanding of what it is and how it can be used and how everything can be optimized in your prevention, I think there is leeway for improvement, for doing things better. And although you read in the papers all the time things about economics and microeconomics, about companies, etc., and you also read things about safety, that there is an accident here, an accident, you hardly ever in the newspaper read things about the combination of safety and microeconomics. Yeah, it's not enough understood and not enough focus is put on it. So safety measures, to my understanding and feeling, are often and too often based on belly feeling decisions. You have the risk matrix, you have prioritization of risks, and then you decide to deal with the first 4 risks, for example. That's belly feeling. That's not doing an optimization with respect to economic information and sensitivity analysis. And the costs and the hypothetical benefits of safety measures are insufficiently used for feeding the economic analysis. Then I want to give some recommendations as, to conclude. I would recommend to bring economic models and approaches into account for safety investments in companies, and that of course academia helps to improve the user friendliness of tools and software, etc., and of course consultants. Also, ideally, ethical aspects should be involved, and there should be some kind of information about how to calculate human life, how to see this and that with respect to ethics and ethical aspects, because I think it will become more and more important in the future. And there should be balanced decision-making, where the risks are calculated with ethical dimension, with an economic dimension, and with a rational dimension, of the scenarios. And finally, I want to say that safety fundamentally contributes, and people should understand it, because in the end, it's also about the attitude of people, the perception, the attitude, and the questioning attitude, and the way that people conceive risks and how they behave. It contributes to the long-term profitability of any company, of any organization. Safety really brings hypothetical benefits. People should understand it's not just production and innovation. If you increase production, it's obvious that you increase profits. But it's also the case that if you increase safety, you increase the hypothetical benefits. So you also increase profits in an indirect way, in a hypothetical way, but you don't have the losses. So it's the same thing. It should be seen, it should be regarded at the same level. Safety and security on the one hand, and production and innovation on the other hand. If you think about football, you have attackers who score the goals. They are the production people, and that's necessary to win the matches. But you also need the defenders to keep the counterpart, the other team, to score goals. And if you have bad defenders, you will not win, and you will certainly not win tournaments in the long term. Okay? So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any questions or whatever, I would be very happy to answer them.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. So, first, let me tell you that we from industry are, do not bring out this economic perspective of this. Normally, safety investment is related to top management commitment, is related to something value-based. So it was very, very interesting. The tangible benefits of safety investment, I think most of us will agree from the industry that this was a really fruitful session and bringing out a new dimension to what we used to think. So I would further hand over the session to our three moderators from IIT Kharagpur, Souvik, Sinjana, Ashish, for Q&A.
Thank you, ma'am, for this wonderful presentation. And starting directly from the basics of risk and uncertainty, how nicely you integrated the economic aspects with the safety, various economic terminologies you have given in safety terms, and finally moving towards the cost benefit analysis of the implementing safety recommendations through the economic way. Questions here. So we will take some of the questions. Like first question is, how do you estimate accident cost using asset analysis?
Using asset analysis?
Yes.
Well, accident costs are to be determined by thinking about the possible scenarios of accidents. You think in terms of scenarios. And then, of course, you need to think about, okay, what are all the possible, that's the list that I showed, all the possible categories of costs, subcategories of costs that can be involved in an accident. Because you have the direct costs, but also indirect costs. And that's why this list is so important. You can actually do approximations and you only calculate the direct costs of accidents, but then you have to multiply the number by, well, say 4 or 5, but it's very difficult to know what kind of multiplication factor to use. But in principle, if you go down the list of subcategories of costs in your asset analysis, while looking at a certain scenario, you have the costs of the scenario. You can calculate the cost of the scenario.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
I want to thank everybody because I saw many applause. I want to thank everybody for their enthusiasm and for being so attentive and for their positive reaction.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. So next question is, how do we know what value of discount factor we should take? That means how to decide on the discount factors.
And that's difficult because it changes, usually changes all the time. It's something that is more like determined macroeconomically. So the discount factor can be 1%. Now that's actually just an expression, a translation of the future money, of the inflation, the future money value into the current money. So it's difficult to tell. It's very difficult. It depends on inflation, etc. So therefore, of course, you can do a sensitivity analysis and you can actually use different discount factors to see what is the impact on the result. For example, from 1 to 5% discount factor, and then you see, okay, what is the result of 1% discount factor, of 2, of 3, of 4, of 5, and you have more informed decisions, and you can adapt it along the way. The next year you can again do the exercise and see what is the discount factor that year, something like that.
Yeah, Ashish,
Yes, sir.
can we just tell some of the
Yes.
participants to ask directly?
Yes, sir. So now participants can unmute themselves and they can directly ask the questions we have given this year. We have allowed
May I ask a
them.
question, sir, please?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, Professor
My name is,
Surprakash.
Chandrasekhar from Bangalore. Professor, if the plant is new, a petrochemical complex is new, 1 year old, 10 year old, or 25 years old, then the aging of the factor, how to calculate in the safety?
The sound is very bad. Can somebody repeat if somebody understood?
Can you repeat the question, sir?
Sir, can you write your question in chat box? Actually, the voice is not clear, sir.
I can. Is it my voice is audible?
I wanted to ask if the plant is brand new, petrochemical complex, 1 year old, 10 year old, 25 years old, how to incorporate the aging of the tank, aging in the safety calculations?
So I didn't understand. I don't know whether somebody understood that can tell me, but I didn't understand. Sorry.
Professor, can you hear me?
Professor, Mr. Chandrasekhar is asking, as the plant becomes old, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, how will you really integrate these factors, the aging factor, in your all operational economics calculations? That is what he's asking.
Okay. So you mean aging factors into the economic approach? How do you do that? Yeah. That's a good question. And aging factors actually translate into risks, right? So if you could translate your aging of your installations into the risk figures, the scenarios, the consequences and the likelihood, mainly because the likelihood becomes different, of course. The likelihood becomes bigger and bigger of the scenarios. You will see this translated into your economic analysis automatically. So older installations with a higher likelihood and probability of accident scenarios will be translated into the economic approach. That's an automatic way.
Thank you, sir.
Hello?
So, yes.
Am I audible? This is Dr. Swarnendu from Bangalore.
Hello.
I have basically a question because your presentation is really nice, very informative. But in industry, doing this kind of detailed calculations are a bit time consuming. So it is generally preferred a UCO approach that we generally follow in industry to go into this alert kind of decision to the cost benefit analysis into safety. So how do you suggest that we should incorporate that your detailed approach with that UCO model that is already used in the industry?
I think that's a very, very good and nice question. And thank you for your positive evaluation of the presentation. But I think it's a very good question. I think that actually it's the same with risk assessment like for 50 years ago. It was considered very expensive as well in the 1960s to do risk assessments, because it took a lot of time. People had to get used to it. It's a steep learning curve to do risk assessment. In 1970, doing a HAZOP was not evident, or doing a what-if analysis. So it's the same with the economic analysis now. Yeah. So you should really invest in it to get the profits out of it. But I'm quite optimistic about the fact that you can really get benefits out of it, because you much better understand the benefits with economic parameters involved, and you also can explain much better if something happens anyway to the government and to the people living around, etc. Because it's also a license to operate more. If you take also economic, ethical aspects into account, you really have a good case. And I really think that things will less happen, but also towards management. But then I mean top management, because all that I have explained can be actually calculated, I think, by middle management or by safety management. But the top management then also gets input about their investments concerning safety. Yeah, but I think indeed that it is an effort in the beginning, just like risk assessments was 50 years ago, or security assessments are, yeah, and that the farther you go, the more you know about it, the easier it will be, the less it will cost, and the more it will benefit.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, sir. So, is there any other questions from participant side?
So this is Professor Alok Kanti Dev from IIT Kharagpur.
Professor P.J. Rao from Andhra University. Yeah.
Professor Dev, please go ahead.
Yeah, I have sent to the speaker one question in the chat. So can you please see my question in your chat box?
No,
No, you can repeat.
Please repeat. Please.
Professor, you initially mentioned the 3 types of risk: risk 1, risk 2, risk 3. So I was just wondering that whether we can in which category can we consider this COVID-19? What type of risk?
In principle, type 2, of course. It's not a type 1. Type 1 is occupational risk. They happen a lot. It's like falling down the stairs. It's like getting something on your head, and it's not huge consequences, type 1. Type 2 is that it doesn't happen a lot. It's quite, but and when it happens, there's lots and lots of victims.
Can it also be like I was thinking whether it can be type 3?
Yes, because it's unpredictable.
No, in my opinion, it's not a type 3 because we could have been prepared. Yeah. By the way, in China, they handled it in a completely different way with respect to Europe or US. So we had many epidemics in the past. We had it. We had in 1919, we had a Spanish flu. In 1349, we had almost 1/3 of Europe dying due to the plague. So we had many epidemics. So it's not a type 3.
Mr. Gilnair, actually, this is unpredictable, or the frequency of this type of incident is very rare. I think this happen every 25 and 30 and 50 or 75 years. Frequency is very less. How could you say in?
But actually, we already learned a lot from past epidemics. That's why, for example, quarantine is a word from Italian that the ships had to be in the water for 14 days. Quarantine 14, it means in Italy, before people could come on the shore. So that's, for example, one example of something that we learned from past epidemics. Also, the mouth masks were used 100 years ago. So it's not, I think it's not the case that it's really a type 3. Yeah. Because it did happen. For example, 9/11 would be a type 3 because it didn't happen. But now it's a type 2 if something like that happens again. But in any case, this is not important. I mean, it's really not important. It's some kind of a semantic discussion. It's how you define a black swan. It's how you define it. Some people will say it's a black swan. Others will say it's not a black swan. To me, that's not the important. The important thing is, okay, how do we translate this into real safety measures and safety management, etc.? You know.
Okay, thank you. Very nicely explained. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir, I have a question actually. I am Professor P.J. Rao.
Yeah, Professor Rao, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for giving the opportunity. Actually, in India, we have developed the policy of pharmaceutical industries. Nowadays, so many pharmaceutical industries coming up. And actually, up to December 31st, actually, we have so many industries to come. Actually, they don't know exactly the safety barriers and whatever the economics professor has given to us, and how to disseminate this information to those industries, because they are very small industries in a big way they are coming up in India. So how we can disseminate this information? How can they save their money and cost of safety and all these things? That is my interest actually.
I think this is a question for Professor Maiti.
Yes, yeah. In fact, you can say that this Weekend Talk is one of such platforms. So the stakeholders, if they join, slowly they will come to know. And there we have Center of Excellence in Safety Engineering Analytics, which also serving for the MSME, like the small medium industries also. So you please go through our website and mail and email to us. Definitely, we will try to help you in this regard.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, sir, for nice explanation of the questions. So I think now we should move ahead. I would like to hand over the session to the ma'am. Ma'am, please.
So I want to. I've seen Professor Uday Kumar is there from Sweden. So want to hear something from you, Professor Kumar.
Yes, I can. It was very interesting. I came late, but I had some other work. It was very interesting, and I can just only comments and give some complimentary comments on your lectures. I was working with defining the road divider on a highway, European highway in Sweden in 2000. We have now put all the dividers. We were in the calculating the cost of a human life, and that was very interesting. How to put the risk and the cost benefit analysis. We did a study and looked into the political. That was a much more like a political decision. People like the socionomes and all were involved, and unofficially, it was not officially declared 14 million, approximately 2 million euro for a human life and other indirect cost of accidents like repair, other vehicle damage. It was all around 3 to 4 million euro we can, 3.5 million. Then we decided to put the divider all over the students. So now divider I will put most of the things. That one example, how to put the lights and cost. And also we looked at the utility value of the divider. So you make a decision. As you gave a good example, I was listening. Like if I lose 1 million, for a Bill Gates, it's no value. He will lose it. He will not think. But a poor man, $1 million is a lot more. So whenever decision you make, what is the utility value of that decision for a particular region? Because Sweden was divided into different and they have to pay for it through the taxes and all. So the utility value of the decision was another factor. Like you are taking the same risk, but what does it mean to me and what does it mean to you? So a lot of decisions were made. So these are some of the comments I can give since you asked.
Yes, thank you, Professor Kumar.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Professor Jenseri, we have a Professor Subhash Babu from IIT Bombay, who is also very senior professor. I want to listen from him also. Professor Subhash Babu,
Yes, enjoy. Talk was very good, very useful. Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Basically, you are in the operational research side, something we could do with you also. So anyhow, I think Ashish, now you please take care.
The model that we showed, that algorithm that we showed, very interesting.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that interesting. Yeah, the algorithm is a very interesting algorithm. That could be actually, it could be worked on further. Quite possible.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Professor Jenseri, before I really propose a vote of thanks, I just want to ask you one question. Have you implemented this operational safety economics in Holland, in any industries?
I've talked about it a lot, but companies, and I've worked together with a big company in Belgium, actually, and they work together to develop some insights, but only parts are implemented in some companies. It's not that everything is implemented in a company. It's certainly not the more difficult things, but investment analysis, I guess also in India, this is used also in some companies in the Netherlands and in Belgium, mostly used. But for example, the disproportion factor is also used mainly in the UK. Yeah, so all things are used at different parts in Europe. Yeah, not all things, but many things are used. For example, the limit diagrams that I didn't talk about, but I mentioned it, or the Bayesian networks. with respect to safety, microeconomics, they are not used, for example, because they are too difficult at the moment.
Did
More simple things are used. Yes.
Did you ever in touch with Amodine, our Amodine plants in steel plant at Amodine?
Sorry, I didn't understand.
Our steel plant, Tata Steel plant.
No.
Okay. Nice talk. Normally we put heads up into operational hazards we see, and we'll very conclusively come to decisions and we implement across the world. I am the consultant across the world in these things. This operational safety economics, a lot of uncertain gains. People do not accept, digest. That's the biggest thing, because risk itself is a lot of uncertainty. It's not certain. That is the problem with the risk or this operational safety economics. But I agree. People, you see, we from our center or NIOSH per se, looking to implement prevention through design. You see, all these things, if you take at the design stage and you put as the cost of design itself, as the cost of product itself, these questions will be minimized. Lot would be minimized. But how to put it into design stage is a big thing, because designers do not have this knowledge. Designers do not have these concepts. They look at the functionality and they want to address the functionality. So this center, our center of excellence, is looking how to take as far as possible the risks, hazards and risks to the design level, so that in next operation and maintenance level, they will come to, say, if not alert level, nearer to alert level. That is one of the objective of the center of excellence. We started to imbibe this knowledge to the students. So they are the people who are going to design in future. They will start right from the beginning and put it. And also we want to the center is directly trying to interact with the industries, so that we can train those industry people on these aspects in our institute. We are trying to get it good. This is very, very nice talk to instigate people to think into these directions. Always we cannot think in small things and do the small improvements. This operational safety economics, if you make it more usable to the people, industry people, this will be appreciated by them. I appreciate your talk. There are many people who are appreciating. I'm very happy because I read your book also. I could appreciate easily what you have put it. We will be taking your help in future at our center when we want to address this. You see, I want to tell the audience, the industries in India, abroad, there is no much difference. They're all same. Thinking is also same. Not much difference. I have seen many developed countries. I have seen the industries in India. Not much difference. Don't think that you have a different scale, different way of thinking. No. The risk and addressing the risk is same. Some of the industries in India, we take, when we talk to industries abroad, they say you go to India and see this plant. Indians, we say you go there and you see the plant. So this is the industry maturity levels is almost same in the world now. The industries which are in India, industries in abroad, the maturity level is same. Our plant, the Tata Steel plant at Ahmedabad and Tata Steel plant in Jamshedpur, I don't see much difference. They're all same. Thank you, Professor Jansik, for your excellent speech. People want to develop. You have to develop on this. You are not given ready-made solutions. You are given the basics. From the basics, we have to develop if you want to do it in the industries. And also I suggest people to go through his book. That will give little more insights, more explanations. Thank you very much. Yeah. And yeah.
we are not learning. If you say industries, maturity level of industry is the same in the developed country as well as in India. The fatality rate per million in UK is 4.3, in US is 34, in India is 64. That is the fatality rate per million workers. So although we have expertise in process safety, the basic question needs to be asked, do we understand the risk perspective? Do we understand what could go wrong? Do we see the barriers which we have? Are they functioning properly? So a lot of progress has been made, but the basic question remains, we are not learning. Similar incidents are taking place around the world, in India, but we are not learning from those incidents. That's the problem. We need to institutionalize the learning process. That's the that's the most important. So therefore, industry academia interface has to be strengthened, because our time has come to institutionalize the learning process. We are not learning from the mistakes. That's a fact. Thank you.
Anyway, the COE, the purpose of COE putting in is one of the objective to have industry academics interactions more.
Yeah, but actually I agree, and I think that's another presentation. Huh? Yeah, I also have presentations about learning from incidents and how you can improve that. That's for sure. But thank you very, very much for all the nice comments.
Many case studies on learning from incidents, but the issue is, are we learning? That's the issue.
Yeah, I understand. But there are ways to learn better from incidents. That's
studies. We have learnings. The main question is, do we learn? Do we actually learn? Otherwise, why accidents or incidents should take place? And if you look at the accidents and incidents, they are more or less of the similar results. Take any accidents, right from Bunzfeld to Jaipur, any incident you take, last 30 years, the root cause is more or less same. The issue is we are not learning. Either we are complacent or it is a human paradox. The human paradox.
Yeah.
Don't presume that no major accidents take place in our industry.
Thank you, Mr. Datto. These are the burning issues we will discuss definitely. And our COE is there. Please be in touch with COE. And definitely we will do something more.
We need to address this.
So thank you, audience, for your presence. A large number of people are attending these sessions. It's a great motivation to all of us. And the team who is monitoring these, Mom Mitra, Savik, Ashish and Sinjana, thank you all. And we also thank IIT Kharagpur for giving this platform to share this knowledge. Thank you all. Thank you, Professor Maiti, for your interaction. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Professor Jansherik, wonderful lecture and so good explanation. We are thankful to you. We want some more lecture from you.
No, I would like to thank everybody for being present and for enjoying the lecture and for so much good comments. And as I say, I have many more presentations actually, Professor Maiti. You can learn by company memory and by performance management, etc., etc. But thank you all very much and have a very nice, well, in your case, evening, I think.
So, yeah, ours is evening.
Bye.
Evening, morning, everything
is also evening now. Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.